Welcome back to the eSpecial Needs podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Blanner. Here at eSpecial Needs, we want you to be able to attain not only the products that you need to help your kiddo thrive, but also get information and resources to help your family function at its best. Today we're talking to Sarah Weirich. Sarah is the mastermind behind the Instagram account and blog Embracing the Spectrum. She's a college professor and a single mom of her son Tristan, who has level 3 autism and sensory processing difficulties. She's created a sensory space for her kiddo in her own 2-bedroom apartment, and it looks amazing. On top of purchasing products for her son, Sarah also does some nifty DIYs. And we're here to talk about those DIYs today. Welcome, Sarah. Introduce us to you and your son, and please don't be shy. Tell us like a good chunk of how you got here.
Sure, absolutely. I'm a single mom to Tristan, who is a social, spirited, self-directed, and highly communicative, nonverbal 9-year-old boy. And I say highly communicative and nonverbal. I know that it is ironic, but I think that really sums him up quite accurately. I think when people think nonverbal, they conjure an image in their mind of, quote unquote, low functioning or aggressive or not aware, etc. However, I just really see that Tristan's eye contact, his empathy and ability to pick up on tone, conversation topics, the ability to predict people's behavior, even make jokes. Yes, fart jokes, but still jokes.
He's 9. What are you going to do?
9, it kind of makes sense. And he observes like some social cues and facial expressions. And I think these rank among the highest I've seen in a kid with autism. And yes, I know he's my son, but I just think that just kind of sums him up so nicely.
And I saw on your blog, I did some stalking around, as one does. And I saw that he's a level 3.
Yes, he's level 3 so he requires a 1-to-1 throughout the day. He meets certain requirements for state programming, etc., which has been helpful in crafting these sensory spaces. Yeah, and that can you introduce us to yourself as well before we kind of get into talking about sensory spaces, because you guys have extremely cool stuff. Sure. I actually my main job is I teach college students on Middle Eastern politics.
Wow.
and I run study abroad programs, and I love it. But I swear this is becoming an incredible side business of mine, and I love designing sensory spaces. I love helping parents and individuals who are adults figure out, okay, what do you want? What do you need? And how can we achieve it?
Yeah, that's incredible. Awesome. So let's talk kind of about your sensory space that you've got going on a little bit before we kind of talk about other stuff. But how did you come to needing that space?
I think realizing that Tristan was just not accessing the home therapies or even some of the school curriculum, just really thinking about what his needs are in the environment. So in addition to having, I should back up, in addition to having autism spectrum disorder and being nonverbal, he also has sensory integration disorder. So that means he does have trouble processing the world around him, and he needs that actual movement to then engage in either learning or kind of social relationships afterward. Because if your body's dysregulated, your mind's going to be dysregulated, you're not going to be ready for engaging on those levels. So I just started, as soon as he got diagnosed, he was around 3. So he missed early intervention because of state programming former state programming at the time. And because he met all these other cues, he could tell a joke, he could, he could actually give, people have this misconception of autism, but he could give a hug, he could give social contact. He was speaking at the time. And then he kind of slowly stopped. And so he missed all that. But one of the first things I bought was a platform swing. I was like, I don't see why I can't have a platform swing in the house. And I remember the therapist going, okay, that's not very traditional. And I was like, I don't understand why not. The OT. And I remember being met with some weird resistance, and then thinking oh, we can just use it as a reward system. And I was like, I think it's more than a reward. It's a bodily need.
Yeah, it helps them process. Yeah.
And I just started, I guess it became like the gateway drug, but I just started expanding from there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you have like, it looks like from your Instagram, you have like a whole sensory room for him. Is that his bedroom, or is that like a separate room, or?
Right. So I have believe it or not, I have a 2-bedroom apartment.
Wow.
And so I took over like probably half of the living room area space, and to use as the active sensory gem part. And then I used his bedroom to just be the sensory kind of zen part of the house. I left my bedroom intact, at least. So.
Nice. And so he kind of like is able to like calm down in his bedroom. Like, does he have all these sensory things as he falls asleep? Sorry.
Oh, no. I love it. So I'll break it down though. So I use the the active area for we have breaks during therapy or currently during, COVID homeschooling and distance learning. But we do breaks here, and then we come back to work, and then we do breaks, and we go do something fun. And so that's all the active swinging that you'll probably see on the Instagram or blog or whatever. The sensory zen functions very differently, and that's really his room, and it's his space to go calm down if he needs, to just relax, to be away from me if he wants, to also be with me if he also desires that, and to help him sleep. Oh my gosh, that has helped him sleep so much.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I can only imagine. So you keep kind of like the fiber optics going and the bubble tubes going as he sleeps as well?
I do for part of the night, and then I just turn them off after he starts sleeping. So
nice.
Which is nice.
And you found that to be effective?
Absolutely.
That's so cool. Because we sell a lot of these products obviously at eSpecial Needs.
Yes, yeah.
But like I don't always get to know kind of like the impact of it and how people particularly use it. So I find it very interesting when I'm able to like hear about it. But we saw things like that. So kind of backtracking a little bit, take us through diagnosis and action. So what was like effective for Tristan? What was ineffective? We kind of touched on it, but I would like to be a little more explicit if that's okay.
Of course. So I think as with most therapies, it really depends on how it's carried out and who's carrying it out. I've gone through several occupational therapists, several ABA companies, speech therapists, etc. And I think, even one of these companies asked me to actually be out of the room during therapy. Like, don't come home until 8:00. And I was like, that's not feasible, A, and not the purpose of home therapy, B. Another example is one of his occupational therapists focused on only what Tristan was averse to. So in this case, and I don't know why, it was blueberry shaving cream. I kept asking her, why does it have to be blueberry shaving cream? She's like, well, he's going to shave one day. And I'm like, well, does he have to use blueberry shaving cream? Aren't there like shaving gels, soaps, like water, like people are shave in all different kinds of ways when they grow up, And she's like, well, if we don't decrease his tolerance, he'll never be able to do X, Y, and Z. And I just never saw that connection. I just said, okay, well, we don't agree here. So let's not do this anymore. Cause he would throw up around it. So I was like, well, that's really a sense.
That's not good.
That's it, and I was like, you're an occupational therapist. This is a sensory, repulsion, So I think two things. One, it's important to find the providers you agree with philosophically. And then the second one is to realize what your philosophy actually is when you're going through this mess of after a diagnosis. And then you go, okay, what do I do? You go to therapies and you check that off your list if you're like a type A like me. And then you're like, okay, I did it. And then you're like, wait a minute, I don't agree with you. So then you have to go back and really look at what your parent goals are. And after years of doing this, you're like, okay, my three main goals for me, at least in my family, are 1, is it social? 2, is it functional? And 3, is it fun? And if it doesn't fit in those, I don't do it.
How did you discern that those were your like main philosophies?
I think mainly in being told by other companies' philosophies what they believe, and then just finding that feeling, that mom gut feeling, if you will, or I know I hate to say that, but it's like intuition. And then you start going, well, let me read a bunch of things. And then I just started reading autism books, and I started listening to adults who are autistic, and kind of going, okay, so that did not work for you, or that did work for you. And then kind of seeing, well, maybe Tristan's similar to her or similar to them, and looking at what that looked like. But then the second thing is, man, your home team has to be 80% in agreement. You want them to agree with each other 80%. I have worked with teams that agree with each other less than 50, and you don't get anywhere. You don't get anywhere in terms of school therapy or home therapy, or kind of the bridge between the two. And you want that 20% about, for learning and for growth, and, to have different perspectives. But it was so nice to have monthly meetings of the speech, OT, and the ABA in my house, kind of going through things. And I'm like, this is what learning really looks like for adults too,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I'm sure there's a huge learning curve when it comes to that kind of parenting.
Absolutely. And then crafting kind of goals together was probably the most beneficial thing I could tell parents.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, interesting. That's a very methodical way of going about that process. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense considering probably your level of education.
I know. I'm such a nerd.
No, you're good. So shifting a little bit more, let's talk kind of about a challenge that you've had to overcome. How did you do it? What did you learn? And what advice do you have for parents who are in a similar situation as it pertains to your son? Absolutely.
I think I was thinking about this one was the hardest question, I think. And I decided to answer it kind of two parts. I think the hardest thing, the biggest challenge is still the one that I'm presented with on a daily basis, actually. I think being a single parent with a child with complex needs presents daily journeys, struggles, and huge benefits that happen every day. But the feelings of isolation do sink in when you're a single parent, and you start kind of going, oh my God, what am I doing? What am I doing? And then I joined a ton of parent groups just to find the right parent group for me. Worked for me. And now that everything's virtual, it's kind of interesting. And so now it's like being a single mom while working and doing COVID homeschooling, and you're like, okay, how do I do this? And what I decided to do was just work on 3 goals during this crazy, unexpected time. And one is regulation, which is where all your equipment usually comes into play. And 2, kind of communication with the AAC device, the augmentative and assistive communication device, and 3, life skills. So that's why you'll see videos of him cooking and making salmon with me.
Oh,
just he loves. And I'm like, really? You like this? That's wonderful. And I've learned, and by having this distance learning with the school, and this is how I've overcome it, is that all the at-home activities, they're centered around areas of motivation and engagement. And I talk to him like a typical kid. I acknowledge his nonverbal communication. I do some small sabotage. Yes, I'm a queen of sabotage, but I don't make.
What do you mean by that?
But I don't make it seem like work. So that's important. So for instance, he'll come over and he'll say, I want chocolate. And I'm like, okay, I don't have any. Should we go to the store? And I kind of just wait for him to kind of think about what are the next steps in that without giving him everything. What many people do with nonverbal kids is they're like, oh, he needs help. And I'm like, no, let him think for himself. He will work it out. And that's kind of the small sabotage I mean. Not helping him every second of the day. He needs to grow in independence. He needs to grow and tolerate frustration levels and have a communication, with me. That's like, okay, let's go to the store. That's my problem solution, Mom. Time to go.
That's good executive functioning.
Exactly.
Too.
And I think that's what people think nonverbal, and they think they don't have executive function. I'm like, actually, executive function applies.
That's where you're wrong.
It applies to many different people, diagnosis or not. I teach college students. I've seen it,
Oh my gosh. I could only imagine. God bless.
I know. And I think like having that environment surrounded by an increase in movement and sensory input at home is like letting the school see this window of Tristan and go, wow, okay, what can we do that's effective? What is mom doing that's effective? And how can we replicate that in the fall?
Yeah. So does his school have those kind of sensory supports for him?
They do. They have a great movement room. And I actually have designed some stuff with the OT there, which has been great.
That's awesome. How did you come about designing sensory things?
So actually, that's a good question too. Because
it's very different from Middle Eastern politics.
I know, right? Like, let's have two passions in life, right?
Yeah.
I think what was been so interesting for me is that even though Tristan has a very complex diagnosis, I think he's taught me a side that I've never seen in myself before. And that side is just to pull out that creativity and pull out that engineering part of like going, okay, how do I orchestrate this? How do I organize it? And it really started with knowing your child, I think knowing him, and then just seeing kind of what movements does he gravitate to? Is it pressure? Is it vestibular? Is it weight? Is it visual? If you go to OT or PT therapy, take notes. What swings do they like? And then think about like, can I have that in my house? Can I have that in my bedroom? Is that a feasible thing? I think people have this misconception of what living room looks like, of what a dining room looks like, of what a bedroom looks like. And I just push people to challenge that. We've grown up with this is my parents' house, this must be my house, and my grandparents' house. And I'm like, well, let's make it more sensory friendly, autism friendly. It doesn't always have to fit into a certain category that you may not know that you're doing. And then the second thing that I've always done is I just take Tristan to as many children's museums and science museums as possible. And
I did see that on your blog as well.
I think I've learned so much from them. And then what he gravitated to, I was like, could I replicate that? And I'm like, okay, I could try this. And, you have some struggles and failures, but I think the process is what's important, and then just find something they'll grow into. You don't want to spend $600 on a swing or a DIY project. Hopefully it wouldn't be that expensive, but without him or her using it, for instance. So.
With warm weather upon us, it's the perfect time to get your kiddo a little exercise outside. If you have a loved one with special needs or disabilities, a Riften adaptive tricycle might be just right for them. Available in a variety of colors and sizes, Riften adaptive tricycles combine fun and therapy, encouraging muscle strengthening, hand-eye coordination, socialization, and exercise integration. Right now, pick up a free $100 eSpecial Needs gift card with your purchase of a Riften adaptive tricycle at eSpecial Needs. The e-gift card is awarded after the purchase is processed. If the product is returned for any reason, the value of the gift card will be deducted from any refund. Remember to consult your therapist before purchasing. Let's talk about like Tristan's sensory preferences. So you said he has a sensory integration difficulty or disorder?
Yes, he does.
Okay. So like what are his sensory preferences? Does he prefer weight? Does he prefer
No, so he is a 100% vestibular kid. Absolutely. Okay. And he's more obviously the sensory seeking of all the personality types. He is a sensory seeker to the max in terms of noise, light, and vestibular, but vestibular helps him the most in terms of helping regulate his body and his environment, and then being able to engage with people afterwards. Definitely. Those are the two. And then his other one is visual. So visual stimulation, that's why the bubbles help him. That's why the vibration helps him a little. Those are the two kind of categories that he really loves. Weight has been on and off a preference. It depends on his kind of mood that month, I've noticed. So, but we have weighted objects around, but he tends to prefer being squished more than weight.
Compression, yeah. Is he a kinesthetic learner?
Yes, he is, actually. Yeah.
Okay. I feel like once you like know about these kind of like learning styles and sensory preferences, the more that you're able to like see the needs of other people
You're
oftentimes, and perhaps in ways that they don't understand.
definitely. I agree.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So has that helped you as a
It
professor?
has actually, because I'm ready. I mean, I'm ready. I teach in Western Mass, and we're all like granola over here, so it's not a big deal. We have people who have sensory pets and come into the classroom, and it's a normal thing here. So I've only had one distracting sensory pet, and that was a parrot, and just because they spoke, and I was like, okay. That's distracting. But people bring their dogs or their emotional support animals all the time, and people stim in my class. They don't know they're quite stimming if we're being honest, or they're knitting. It's very, very common to focus the mind, and I just allow all of it. So I get the professor award,
awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'm from the Midwest, and we're not there yet, Yeah, we haven't really worked with differentiated learning styles, kids with disabilities or special needs. Yeah. Cool. So back to the questions. All right. So introduce us to Embracing the Spectrum.
Absolutely. So I started this blog just kind of as an avenue and a catalog, basically, of my DIY projects for helping individuals on the spectrum. I have a lot of adult followers who are autistic who follow me, which is just the biggest compliment I've ever received. Honestly, it's amazing because they're always telling me you're doing such a great job, and I'm like, oh my god, that means a lot. It means so much. In a perfect world, I could have just bought all this equipment. Quote unquote specialized equipment doesn't come with many coupons though, and some are incredibly expensive, and so I've just had to make them. I just kind of went rogue, and I was like, well, you know what? I'm gonna just build it. I was, and this is honest, I'm not targeting at anybody, but I was mad at, certain companies increase the prices for items that have the word therapy or special needs in front of the description. Having a kid with special needs is already 3 times the average price as everybody else. He's already pretty expensive, at least my kid is. I located like local grants and some national grants to begin covering for some of the expenses that Tristan needs to help, process his world and get him to that perfect spot of, learning, regulating, and connecting with those around him. I mean, medical and autism grants, state grants, and state programs, which have been great, at least in Massachusetts. They're wonderful.
And so you created Embracing the Spectrum as kind of like a way to showcase the things that you have been doing for Tristan?
Yeah. And kind of like step by step how to do a DIY.
Do you contract people out to help with those, or do you just do them yourself, or how do you do these DIYs?
Most of the DIYs I've done myself. My boyfriend and I have done a few together as well, which has been really kind of just wonderful and just learning more. I've always wanted to take like a construction class or like engineering class. I feel like I'm like part-time engineer sometimes, and usually
yeah, it sounds like you are.
I usually draft like these like ideas, and I'm like, how would I do this? And then I go and talk to someone who knows some of the fabric or some of the, like, I want to design this taco swing, but basically with giant foam instead, and that it bends but doesn't break. And he's like, oh yeah, I know the exact material that you would use. And I'm like, what? Awesome. You need to tell me. But I definitely draft the idea, and I'll color it or sketch it or something. And I'll be like, so what do you think of this? And he's like, oh yeah, this is exactly what you would use. And I'm like, oh, you think we can?
It sounds like necessity is the mother of invention.
It really does seem. I was like, how can I do a compression swing with a big foam and vinyl covered around it that doesn't break its shape though, but just stretches him a little, just kind of, constricts him a little, not stretches. And then I was like, I wonder. But anyways, that's that's a draft idea I just had a few weeks ago. And my boyfriend just told me like, oh yeah, you can just use XYZ material. I forgot what they were, but
so did you guys make
we haven't made it yet. That's a DIY in the creating process still. So I've got a few of those kind of going around in the rattling of my head. But the other ones, he just said, actually, you would use a drill press for, like, for instance, the fiber optic cascade or the comb or whatever you want to call it, that showcases, gosh, your beautiful fiber optics. They're glorious.
Yeah, that was
they're glorious fiber optics, though. And once it was done like that shape, and I was like, wow, this looks even better.
No, it really did. Like, I think I showed that to my manager at the office, and we were both kind of just like gobsmacked.
It was just beautiful. And the one that's on the market, a curved fiber optic comb, is like $450 plus $150 shipping. And I was like, what? I'm not going to spend $600 on this, No.
So how much do you think that, like, approximately how much did it cost?
So that one cost about maybe 160. Once you get the plastic and you get it, and then we cut it, and then we drilled, literally, it felt like 600 holes, it feels like, because you had to drill. We drilled it at least for the 200 strands, and then drilled a tapered side so that it wouldn't get bent for the strand on each side of the hole. So we basically drilled 600 holes. Fun time.
Wow.
And then that was the only piece, though. I just used these little brackets I got from Amazon as the shelf bracket, and that was all the hardware you used. You just use a piece of, probably it would be cheaper for individuals if they just use a piece of plywood, though, and just cut it into a circle. That's a lot cheaper than what polycarbonate would be. But I wanted it to be clear because I wanted it to showcase the fiber optics from underneath and not block them in any capacity. And I really like, kind of acrylic and everything. I used it for the bubble walls as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so you and the boyfriend just made that?
Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible.
I learned what a drill press was. Wow. And I was like, oh, this is the machine I've been wanting to have my whole life.
So another kind of like curious question, do you keep all of his sensory products out at the same time?
So that's actually, I've been asked that a lot. So I have a sensory closet that's rotating for the active area swings, and a schedule board that he chooses if he wants this swing down, this swing up, or both swings if he's doing an obstacle course. But the sensory Zenden, I keep all out because it's basically his room. And it's also a little hard to put away some of the items. I can't move a giant bubble tube. So,
yeah.
So I just left all that the way it is. But I will rotate the small sensory items out of his room a lot. And just so that he gets something new or can engage it a little differently. But the swing closet is the biggest one. So all the therapists that come home, they're like, oh my God, okay, which swing do you want? Because I want this one. I'm like, well, that's great that you like it. So that's.
Do you ever play on these
by the way? Yes. So I
okay. It sounds really fun.
I just love it. I mean, and people don't realize they have this part of them. And I'm like, I'm older and I'm like jumping in the ball pit, And I was like,
yeah, no. We have a full sensory showroom at work. And so whenever I bring, before COVID happened, but whenever I would bring in models like that, I was like, some of my friends have kids. And so whenever I would play with their kids, I would always be like, yes, I can jump in the ball pit and nobody will stare at me because I'm playing with a kid. It's fine.
That's wonderful. Oh my gosh, that's wonderful. Yes, I go in all the swings unless there's a weight limit to the swing. Other than that, I love all of it. And all the sensory toys, I'm like, I always have to touch it first. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful.
Yeah, I feel like people don't realize even your sensory needs don't go away as an adult. And your desire to play also doesn't go away as an adult.
I agree. Actually,
how did you hang those swings?
Yeah, so everyone asks me this question in particular. So I always, there's two ways, right? So one is a doorway swing. You can use it, very, very common for people. People seem to like that a lot as an avenue. I didn't have the space recommendations for that. You really do need about 4 feet of clearance on each side if you do a doorway swing, if you want to be safe about it. You need about 6 foot kind of clearance in a circle clearance if you do it through a plank in the ceiling plank. So the biggest thing you need to do, of course, is use, usually depends on you need to locate I wasn't prepared for this one, but you need to, no, it's wonderful.
Sorry.
I'm just looking at my stuff and I'm like, how did I do that? Oh yeah. So I use a stud finder, and make sure you're going through a stud, of course. And you need about 3-inch kind of lag screws if you're going to use lag screws, but you definitely need 3 inches to make sure it's really up there. You can also buy another piece of plywood, attach that to the ceiling, paint it if you're worried. And I always tell people, because people freak out about putting a hole in their ceiling, and I always tell people it's smaller in diameter than when you would put up a ceiling fan or a ceiling light. It will hardly be noticeable by people at all. The second thing is, if you're in an apartment, you can get something called reasonable accommodation. And it's a law. You can get a little note signed by your child's pediatrician saying that you have a diagnosis, et cetera, and need to have special accommodations. This has covered a range of things for my child, including a rock climbing wall, and I've got several junctures attached to the ceiling, and they don't care.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So it's wonderful. And then when you leave, you just patch it up. I mean, it's no different than putting a mountain friend. You know, it's no different than putting a TV in your wall. And if you mount your TV, you put more holes in your wall than you will a single juncture swing for your child or for yourself.
What do you want to achieve with your blog?
My biggest passion would be to go into family homes and design sensory spaces for their child and or adult. That would be my biggest passion. My second, and right now I go into clinics and I make clinics more autism friendly, or libraries. I'm part of a library committee and I make libraries more autism friendly, which has been really, really great. And then COVID happened and I was like, oh, okay, pause. But my biggest dream one day, and I'm not there yet, but I would love to would be to create and design public sensory spaces for individuals with autism and sensory issues, because many of these individuals can't, they'll get in trouble with the police if they go to a playground because they're over a certain age. They don't have access to money for these public spaces. And I would love for it to be just a place where they can go and relax and have a conversation with each other. And that's what I desire.
That's awesome. So consulting work?
I would say consulting work for sure. And then eventually I would love to design swings and stuff like that. That would be the goal, the biggest goal.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're really good at knowing about the needs and the preferences of the individual, as well as trusting your gut, which is both all important.
Yeah. I love hearing about different kids and what they want, what they need.
Yeah. So what do you wish more people knew about you? And
that we want to be included. Just like a phone call, please include us. But more importantly, that it's not always Tristan who needs to try to fit into society or into the community, but the community can kind of embrace him and change with him. I think we always expect people on the spectrum to fit into society in one way only. Don't take off your ear defenders, don't stim in public, and I think what the public needs is also to be like, oh, we should just also have accommodations for these individuals, and that it's okay for them to do these things and to have that understanding and acceptance, and maybe stim alongside them. I mean, that's some of the biggest help that I've seen. Maybe everyone wears ear defenders. Yeah. Maybe that could be helpful. That's what we've been talking about that for the library issues and stuff like that.
So when you say include us, what specifically?
I think just even from the date, the weekly kind of if there's a Zoom call, a social Zoom call, please include my child too. Or a birthday party. I know birthday parties are a real sensitive subject for many families. But they usually don't want to be included because they don't want to cause a scene or something like that. And I think it's just relaxing all those social expectations would be such a help for us. eating at the table. It was, maybe my kid wants to eat on the floor instead, or maybe, my friend's daughter wants to sit on the couch instead and eat the birthday cake, and to let it be okay.
Basically, is there anything else that like you would like to add when talking about?
Absolutely. I think it's super important to tell yourself that a sensory room does not happen overnight. I find so many parents are dealing with so much levels of guilt already. They add this on top of them. I mean, it's taken me 5 years to craft the sensory spaces I have for Tristan. 5 years. And I think, you can make a sensory corner or a sensory closet fairly easily. Don't get me wrong. But if you really want to start building the room, it's okay to like take it step by step. I usually tell people start with a swing and then work your way around that, because the swing will require the most space. And then I walk through kind of what your child likes the most, kind of what you asked. Do they like compression? Do they like, vestibular, great big swing movements up and forth, back and forth? Do they like spinning? If so, that will change the juncture you will use, for instance. And it's taken, and I always, I do a lecture series at the library, but when I do sensory design, I always couple it with grant writing, because I don't want to leave families going, oh my God, that's a beautiful bubble tube. I will never get it because it's $3,000. And I'm like, well, here's how we get it. And so it's always part two is like, let's write a grant together. And we sit down and write grants with families to just like, what are the needs? How do you do this? What are the materials you need to submit? And then, you roll the dice and you see what happens. I've gotten very lucky to have won a few grants over the years, and I think other families can do so as well.
Yeah. So kind of like, it sounds like you are taking holistic approaches to sensory design. So not only like, are you like, oh, what does your child want and need?
Exactly.
But also how can
I don't want to leave families. Yeah. Or I don't want to leave families really with like, here's this great swing. It's $600. No, here's how you get it,
Yeah. And I think the great thing is that there are increasingly more funding availability on a state level.
And I link a lot of those on my blog as well for Massachusetts cool. residents in particular. Yeah.
I did see that. That's fantastic. That's like one thing that we do want to focus more on at eSpecial Needs, is making sure that we can not only provide families with the products and services that they may need to help their children thrive, but also how to attain those. And that's why we have things like this podcast, and we have a funding tab on our page. And so it's just it's great.
No, and I think working together, I think people will realize not everyone, the system is the way it is, but here's how I can help, and here's what I can do. And as soon as you let parents or adults feel more empowered, they all of a sudden see their world differently and see their sensory space differently. I can get that, or I can do that. And it becomes a lot less guilt.
Yeah, which is, it sounds like guilt is a really big part of not only parenting, but special needs parenting. But yeah. So are there any questions that I should have asked?
I don't think so. I think you asked a lot, and you asked different ones, which was great. So yeah.
All right. So final thoughts. Anything else?
Gosh. I just always like to tell parents that just because your child receives an autism diagnosis, it's not the end of the world. It's just the beginning of a different world. And that just kind of helps them a little. So.
Yeah, that's really great advice.
All I have, really.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for coming on this episode of the podcast. I'm really excited about all the things that we talked about. And I think that there was a lot of like really great insight for our audience.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So, appreciate you having me.
Thank you for listening to the eSpecial Needs podcast. Visit us at eSpecialNeeds.com for a wide selection of adaptive equipment, therapy items, daily living aids, and sensory solutions. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This podcast is produced and hosted by Catherine Blanner with help from Jason Hinklin Lauderdale.